In the grand theatre of human ambition, where fortunes rise and fall like empires, there exists a fundamental principle that governs the distribution of wealth and power. It is not merely the result of luck, inheritance, or even talent alone, but rather the manifestation of what we might call Machiavelli's law of position, a ruthless natural order that determines who ascends to the summit and who remains in the valleys below. The Renaissance master Niccolo Machiavelli understood something profound about human nature and the mechanics of power. He observed that in any system, whether political or economic, those who occupy the top positions do so not by accident, but by understanding and exploiting the fundamental structures that govern human behavior. Today, as we witness unprecedented levels of wealth inequality across the globe, his insights prove more relevant than ever. Consider the modern landscape of wealth concentration. In the United States alone, the top 1% of earners control approximately 32% of all wealth, while the bottom 50% hold just 2%. This is not merely a statistical anomaly. It represents the natural outcome of positional dynamics that Machiavelli would have recognized immediately. Those at the top of the economic hierarchy possess what he called the advantage of position, a self-reinforcing cycle where power begets power and wealth generates more wealth. The first part of this principle manifests in what we observe across industries and societies: the systematic concentration of resources among a small elite. This concentration follows predictable patterns that transcend individual merit or effort. It operates according to laws as immutable as gravity itself, pulling resources upward into the hands of those who have mastered the art of positioning themselves advantageously within existing power structures. But there exists a deeper truth within this observation, one that speaks to personal transformation and the forging of character. The second component of Machiavelli's insight reveals itself in the phrase that echoes through centuries of wisdom: "The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others." This is not merely philosophical rhetoric. It represents a practical understanding of how individuals can transcend their circumstances and ascend to positions of influence and wealth. The weak self, that collection of fears, limiting beliefs, petty desires, and self-defeating behaviors that plague most individuals, serves as the primary barrier between a person and their potential for greatness. Those who accumulate significant wealth and power understand, either consciously or intuitively, that their greatest enemy lies not in external competition. Part 1. The architecture of concentration. The phenomenon of wealth concentration operates according to what economists call the Matthew effect, the principle that advantage compounds over time, creating an ever-widening gap between those who have and those who have not. This effect, named after the biblical verse, "For to everyone who has, more will be given," reveals the mathematical inevitability of inequality in competitive systems. In the modern economy, this manifests through multiple mechanisms that work in concert to channel resources toward those already in advantageous positions. Consider the venture capital ecosystem, where a small number of firms control the vast majority of investment capital. These firms, typically located in geographic clusters like Silicon Valley or New York, develop extensive networks of relationships with entrepreneurs, other investors, and successful company founders. When a promising startup emerges, it naturally gravitates toward these established players because they offer not just capital, but access to networks, expertise, and credibility that cannot be easily replicated. The founder of a successful technology company, having navigated this system once, finds themselves in a position to participate in it as an investor or advisor for the next generation of entrepreneurs. Their wealth, generated from their initial success, becomes the foundation for even greater wealth accumulation through investments in other ventures. They understand the unspoken rules, the key relationships, and the subtle signals that indicate which opportunities are worth pursuing. This dynamic extends far beyond technology into traditional industries as well. In real estate, those with existing capital can leverage their holdings to acquire additional properties, benefiting from economies of scale in management, maintenance, and financing that are unavailable to smaller players. A real estate investor with 10 properties can negotiate better mortgage rates, hire more efficient property management services, and weather temporary vacancies more easily than someone struggling to finance their first rental property. The financial markets themselves are structured in ways that favor large players. High-frequency trading firms spend millions of dollars to locate their servers mere milliseconds closer to exchange data centers, gaining advantages measured in fractions of seconds that translate to billions in profits. Hedge funds with billions under management can negotiate fee structures and access investment opportunities that remain completely unavailable to smaller investors. These examples illustrate a fundamental truth about wealth concentration. It emerges from structural advantages that become self-reinforcing over time. Those who achieve initial success gain access to resources, information, and opportunities that accelerate their continued success. The wealthy don't simply earn more money. They gain access to entirely different economic systems with their own rules and advantages. But the concentration of wealth is not merely a function of existing capital seeking greater returns. It also reflects deeper patterns in how value is created and distributed in modern economies. The rise of network effects and winner-take-all markets has created environments where small differences in capability or timing can translate into massive differences in outcomes. Consider the technology platforms that dominate the modern economy. Facebook, Google, Amazon, and similar companies achieved their dominant positions not through overwhelming superiority in their initial offerings, but by reaching critical mass first in markets where network effects create natural monopolies. Once Facebook had more users than its competitors, it became more valuable to new users, creating a self-reinforcing cycle that ultimately eliminated most competition. The founders and early investors in these companies didn't just capture the value they created. They captured the value created by the entire network of users, advertisers, and third-party developers who made their platforms valuable. This dynamic creates what economists call superstar effects, situations where the rewards for being the best, or even just being first, far exceed the rewards for being very good. In a connected global economy, the best surgeon can write a best-selling book, develop online courses, consult with hospitals worldwide, and build a personal brand that generates income far beyond what they could earn through surgery alone. The very good surgeon, meanwhile, remains constrained by the physical limitations of their local practice. The acceleration of these trends through technology has created unprecedented opportunities for wealth concentration. Digital products can be replicated at near zero marginal cost, allowing successful entrepreneurs to capture value from millions or billions of users simultaneously. The most successful creators on platforms like YouTube, Instagram, or TikTok earn more in a year than most people will see in their lifetimes, not because their content is objectively thousands of times more valuable than their competitors, but because they achieved the critical mass necessary to benefit from algorithmic amplification and network effects. Yet beneath these structural explanations lies a more fundamental question. Why do some individuals successfully navigate these systems while others remain trapped in cycles of mediocrity? The answer lies not in external circumstances, but in internal transformation, the systematic destruction of the weak self that prevents most people from recognizing and seizing the opportunities that surround them. Part 2. The destruction of the weak self. The weak self is the greatest obstacle between an individual and their potential for wealth and influence. It manifests as the collection of psychological limitations, self-defeating beliefs, and behavioral patterns that keep people trapped in cycles of mediocrity. Understanding and systematically destroying these limitations represents the most important work any ambitious individual can undertake. The weak self reveals itself through predictable patterns of thinking and behavior. It seeks comfort over growth, certainty over opportunity, and approval over authenticity. It fears failure more than it desires success, and it consistently chooses the path of least resistance, even when that path leads nowhere meaningful. Most critically, the weak self operates unconsciously, shaping decisions and behaviors without the individual's awareness of its influence. Consider how the weak self responds to opportunity when presented with a chance to start a business, invest in an asset, or develop a valuable skill. The weak self immediately generates reasons why the opportunity is unsuitable. Too risky, too difficult, too late, too early, not the right time, not enough experience, not enough capital. These objections often contain elements of truth, but they serve primarily as psychological defenses against the discomfort of growth and change. The strong individual, the one who has systematically destroyed their weak self, approaches the same opportunity with a fundamentally different mindset. Instead of focusing on reasons why something cannot be done, they focus on how it might be accomplished. They view obstacles as problems to be solved rather than insurmountable barriers. Most importantly, they understand that competence is developed through action, not preparation, and that the best time to begin something important is always now. This difference in mindset creates dramatically different trajectories over time. While the weak individual waits for perfect conditions that never arrive, the strong individual begins imperfectly and improves through iteration and experience. The compound effect of this difference in approach cannot be overstated. Over a period of years or decades, the strong individual accumulates experiences, skills, relationships, and assets that place them in an entirely different category from their peers. The process of destroying the weak self requires systematic attention to several key areas. The first is the elimination of comfort-seeking behaviors that prevent growth. The weak self gravitates toward activities that provide immediate gratification or emotional comfort, excessive entertainment, social media consumption, gossip, complaining, and other forms of mental junk food. These activities serve as psychological anesthesia, numbing the discomfort that naturally accompanies growth and challenge. Replacing these patterns requires the cultivation of what might be called productive discomfort, the willingness to engage in activities that are difficult, uncertain, or emotionally challenging because they lead to meaningful development. This might involve starting a business despite fear of failure, having difficult conversations despite fear of conflict, or pursuing ambitious goals despite uncertainty about the outcome. The second area involves the systematic questioning and replacement of limiting beliefs. The weak self operates according to a collection of assumptions about what is possible, what is deserved, and what is realistic. These beliefs, often formed in childhood or during periods of difficulty, create invisible boundaries that constrain behavior and decision-making. Common limiting beliefs include assumptions about the scarcity of opportunity, the necessity of formal credentials, the importance of others' approval, or the belief that significant wealth is only available to those born into advantage. Destroying these beliefs requires both intellectual and experiential work. Intellectually, it involves studying the biographies and strategies of individuals who have achieved extraordinary success despite ordinary or even disadvantageous beginnings. This study reveals that exceptional achievement follows predictable patterns that can be learned and applied by anyone willing to do the work. Experientially, it requires deliberately exposing oneself to situations that challenge existing beliefs about what is possible. This might involve networking with individuals who operate at higher levels of success, visiting environments where significant wealth is commonplace, or attempting projects that initially seem beyond one's capabilities. These experiences provide direct evidence that current limitations are largely self-imposed. The third area involves the development of what psychologists call emotional regulation, the ability to maintain productive behavior despite difficult emotions. The weak self is controlled by its emotional states, making decisions based on temporary feelings rather than long-term objectives. It avoids necessary actions because they feel uncomfortable, and pursues destructive actions because they provide temporary relief or pleasure. The strong individual, by contrast, has learned to experience emotions without being controlled by them. They understand that temporary discomfort is often the price of permanent improvement, and they have developed the ability to act in alignment with their long-term interests regardless of their momentary emotional state. This skill proves invaluable in business and investing, where the ability to make rational decisions despite fear, greed, or uncertainty often determines success or failure. The fourth area involves the cultivation of what might be called strategic thinking, the ability to see beyond immediate circumstances and position oneself advantageously for future opportunities. The weak self operates reactively, responding to circumstances as they arise, without considering how current decisions might create or constrain future options. The strong individual thinks systemically, understanding that today's actions create tomorrow's opportunities, and that positioning is often more important than immediate returns. This manifests in countless ways throughout a successful individual's career. They choose employers not just for current compensation, but for the skills, relationships, and credentials they will acquire. They select business partners based on long-term strategic value rather than immediate compatibility. They make investments that may show modest returns initially, but position them to benefit from larger trends over time. The destruction of the weak self is not a one-time event, but an ongoing process of vigilance and refinement. The psychological patterns that constitute weakness are deeply ingrained and will reassert themselves unless actively resisted. This requires developing what military strategists call situational awareness, the constant monitoring of one's own thoughts, emotions, and behaviors to ensure they remain aligned with one's strategic objectives. Those who successfully complete this process of self-transformation find themselves operating in a fundamentally different reality from their peers. They see opportunities where others see obstacles, they take action where others hesitate, and they persist where others surrender. Most importantly, they understand that their external circumstances are largely reflections of their internal state, and that changing their results requires first changing themselves. Part 3. The invulnerable position. The ultimate expression of Machiavelli's law of position emerges when an individual has successfully destroyed their weak self and learned to position themselves advantageously within existing power structures. At this point, they achieve what might be called the invulnerable position, a state where external circumstances can no longer permanently damage their prospects because their strength comes from within rather than from external validation or security. This invulnerability does not mean immunity from temporary setbacks or failures. Even the most successful individuals face economic downturns, competitive challenges, health problems, and other difficulties that can temporarily reduce their wealth or influence. The invulnerable position means that these setbacks become opportunities for growth and repositioning rather than permanent defeats, because the individual possesses the internal resources necessary to rebuild and adapt regardless of external circumstances. Consider how this manifests in the business world. The entrepreneur who has destroyed their weak self approaches failure fundamentally differently from their less developed peers. When a business venture fails, they do not interpret this as evidence of their inadequacy or as reason to abandon their ambitions. Instead, they systematically analyze what went wrong, extract valuable lessons from the experience, and apply this knowledge to their next venture. They understand that failure is tuition paid to the University of Experience, and that each failure increases their probability of future success. This mindset creates a profound competitive advantage over time. While others are paralyzed by fear of failure or destroyed by actual failures, the strong individual accumulates experience and resilience that makes them increasingly formidable. They develop what venture capitalists call pattern recognition, the ability to quickly identify promising opportunities and potential pitfalls based on previous experience. This skill, combined with the willingness to act despite uncertainty, allows them to move faster and more decisively than competitors who lack similar experience. The invulnerable position also manifests in financial behavior. Individuals who have destroyed their weak self approach money and investing with a fundamentally different psychology from the general population. They understand that true wealth comes not from income alone, but from the systematic accumulation of income-producing assets over time. They are willing to live below their means in order to invest the difference, understanding that temporary sacrifice creates permanent advantage. More importantly, they are not emotionally dependent on their current level of wealth or lifestyle. This psychological independence allows them to take calculated risks that others cannot consider because they know they could rebuild if necessary. They can invest in volatile but potentially lucrative opportunities, start new businesses that might fail, or relocate to pursue better opportunities, because their sense of security comes from their capabilities rather than their current assets. This financial fearlessness creates access to opportunities that remain invisible to those trapped by the weak self. While others avoid investments they cannot afford to lose, the strong individual understands that they cannot afford not to take intelligent risks. They recognize that inflation, taxation, and economic change make it virtually impossible to preserve wealth through conservative strategies alone, and that real wealth creation requires accepting some level of uncertainty and volatility. The invulnerable position extends beyond financial matters to encompass relationships and social dynamics as well. Individuals who have destroyed their weak self no longer depend on others' approval for their sense of self-worth or direction in life. This independence creates a magnetic quality that attracts others while simultaneously protecting against manipulation or exploitation. In professional settings, this manifests as the ability to speak truth to power, advocate for one's interests, and maintain boundaries without fear of rejection or retaliation. Such individuals become valuable precisely because they cannot be controlled through emotional manipulation or threats to their security. Their colleagues and superiors know they will provide honest feedback and reliable performance because their motivation comes from internal standards rather than external pressure. This authenticity and independence also creates opportunities for leadership that remain unavailable to those still trapped by the weak self. People naturally gravitate toward individuals who demonstrate genuine confidence and competence, and who are not seeking validation or approval through their interactions. These qualities, combined with proven ability to create results, often lead to positions of increasing responsibility and influence. The invulnerable position creates what systems theorists call optionality, the ability to benefit from positive developments while minimizing exposure to negative ones. This comes partly from financial resources that provide flexibility and opportunity, but more importantly, from the psychological resources that allow rapid adaptation to changing circumstances. When new technologies emerge that disrupt existing industries, the strong individual sees opportunity where others see threat. They have the confidence to learn new skills, the resources to invest in emerging trends, and the relationships necessary to access information and opportunities ahead of the general population. Most critically, they have destroyed the psychological barriers that prevent most people from embracing significant change. This adaptability becomes increasingly valuable in an economy characterized by rapid technological and social change. Traditional career paths and business models become obsolete with increasing frequency, creating enormous challenges for those whose identity and security depend on specific roles or industries. The individual who has achieved the invulnerable position thrives in such environments because their strength comes from their ability to create value rather than from their position within existing structures. The culmination of this process is the achievement of what might be called systemic influence, the ability to shape the systems and structures within which others operate. This represents the highest expression of Machiavelli's law of position, where an individual moves beyond simply optimizing their position within existing hierarchies to actually creating and controlling new hierarchies. This level of influence manifests in various forms depending on the individual's interests and capabilities. Some create new industries or business models that generate wealth for themselves and others. Some develop investment platforms that provide capital and guidance to emerging entrepreneurs. Others build educational or media platforms that shape how people think about success, wealth, and opportunity. Regardless of the specific form it takes, systemic influence represents the ultimate transcendence of ordinary limitations. The individual who achieves this level of impact has moved beyond competing within existing games to creating new games with rules that favor their unique strengths and interests. They understand that the highest levels of wealth and influence come not from optimizing performance within existing systems, but from creating systems that generate value for many while concentrating returns for themselves. The path to this level of achievement requires the complete destruction of the weak self and its replacement with what we might call the systematic self, a way of being that operates according to principles rather than emotions, strategies rather than tactics, and long-term vision rather than short-term gratification. This transformation is available to anyone willing to undertake the necessary work, but it requires a level of commitment and self-discipline that most individuals are unwilling to maintain. Those who complete this journey find themselves operating in a reality where wealth concentration is not a mysterious phenomenon to be resented or envied, but a natural outcome of principles that can be understood and applied. They recognize that the concentration of resources at the top of economic hierarchies reflects the concentration of certain qualities: strategic thinking, emotional discipline, systematic action, and continuous learning that remain rare in the general population. Most importantly, they understand that their greatest protection against external threats comes not from their accumulated wealth or positions of power, but from their ability to recreate these achievements if necessary. Having destroyed the weak self that limits most individuals, they possess the internal resources necessary to build wealth and influence regardless of external circumstances. This makes them truly invulnerable in the only sense that matters. They cannot be permanently diminished because their strength comes from within rather than from external circumstances. The individual who has achieved this state serves as living proof of Machiavelli's fundamental insight that those who understand and apply the laws of position will naturally rise to positions of influence and wealth, while those who remain trapped by their psychological limitations will find themselves subject to forces they cannot control or understand. The concentration of wealth at the top is not an accident or injustice, but the inevitable result of the concentration of certain qualities that enable extraordinary achievement. In our modern era of unprecedented opportunity and rapid change, these principles remain as relevant as they were in Machiavelli's Renaissance Italy. The technologies and systems may have evolved, but the fundamental dynamics of human psychology and social organization remain constant. Those who master themselves will master their circumstances, while those who remain slaves to their weaknesses will remain trapped by limitations of their own creation. The choice, as always, belongs to the individual. The principles are available to anyone willing to study and apply them. The opportunities exist for those with the courage to pursue them. But the transformation from weakness to strength, from ordinary limitation to extraordinary capability, requires a depth of commitment that few are willing to undertake. This is why wealth concentrates at the top, not because of external injustice, but because of internal transformation that remains rare and difficult to achieve. Those who complete this transformation join the ranks of individuals throughout history who have understood that their greatest enemy lies within, and that victory over this internal enemy makes victory over external challenges not just possible, but inevitable. They embody the truth that the man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others. because he has eliminated the source of his vulnerability and replaced it with the systematic cultivation of strength.